And I think that's it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jen Smith and I'm Head of Inclusion at the British Film Institute, and I'm warmly welcoming you to our event today. I'll be deliberately keeping my remarks brief so we can get on with the order of things, and I will self-describe myself for anybody with a visual impairment. I have light brown curly hair, I have a floral top on today, blue eyes and red lipstick. There are lots of people that I do just need to thank. I'd like to start by thanking Sadia and Shaf at the Riz Test and UK Muslim Film for all their hard work. The BFI are delighted to support the research of the Riz Test and continue to work with UK Muslim Film on an ongoing basis. I'm also pleased that alongside our event today, we have a number of people working with the BFI as part of our Screen Advisory Group on Muslim representation. This will meet with BFI inclusion team colleagues several times a year. I'd like to thank Simon Mir and Sajid Vada for agreeing to chair that group and for all the hard work they've put in to date. This event and the Screen Advisory Group has been a long time in the making, but before I even joined the BFI, in my previous industry of housing and construction, conversations I had with friends and colleagues helped me to see disparity, tropes and underrepresentation of Muslims in the media, and that I could play an important role as a better ally as well as in my professional life. Farouk Mohammed, the conversations we had were never lost on me, because once you can see disparity, it's impossible to unsee it. Thank you, and thank you to all the members of the advisory group who continue to shape our thinking at the BFI. My team are driven by a number of guiding principles, but they're just a few I wanted to share with you today. What we do matters in this industry because imagery is persuasive. We have to ditch the labels because great storytelling has universal appeal. And finally, it's never too late to do things differently or to learn. Diversity and inclusion are not our industry's biggest problem, but our industry's biggest untapped opportunity. So thank you so much for attending. I'll now hand back to Rico, our event moderator, to begin the session.
Hi, I'm just going to hand straight over to Sajid.
To Shaf.
Shaf, yeah.
Yes.
Morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Shaf Chowdhury. To self-describe, I am a South Asian with a greying beard in a white room with a dark blue jumper and some thick-rimmed glasses. First off, I'd like to thank Jen and the BFI for having us this morning. It's a real pleasure to be here. So my name is Shaf Chowdhury. I am co-founder of the Riz Test, and with Dr. Sadia Habib. Now, we've been working for about 2 or 3 years on this project now, and what you're going to see today is the first cut, the first sneaky peek at this data that we've put together, and we're calling it 120 years of Muslims on screen. First of all, who are the Riz Tests? As I've mentioned, Dr. Sadia Habib, my co-founder, she has a PhD from Goldsmiths in identity and belonging. She's a very accomplished academic, and she's an author of number of books. Myself, the best way to describe me is I'm a massive geek. I've worked in tech my whole career. I was that precocious child who learned to code early, Dungeons and Dragons, all of that good stuff. And right now I'm really obsessed with algorithmic bias and privacy. So what is the Riz Test? Now, the Riz Test was heavily inspired by the Bechdel test, which is a wonderful test to measure how women are represented in film and TV. Me and Sadia thought long and hard about what does a Muslim version of that look like. and we went through a few iterations, and we landed with this one with 5 criteria. The qualifying criteria being, does the show, TV, a production, movie or film have at least one character that is identifiably Muslim? Are they a terrorist? Are they irrationally angry? Are they culturally backwards? Are they a threat to a Western way of life? Or, depending on male or female, are they misogynistic, or are they presented as oppressed? Now, you may think that it's quite easy, it must be easy to follow to pass the Riz test, but we'll come on to that. What we found is that the 5 criteria ultimately fall under 3 themes of terror, culture, and gender. And we'll come back to that in a second. Now, what I wanted to do, this is 11 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. It's early, probably had 1 coffee. I wanted to engage a little bit of our critical thinking and just get that going. And what I wanted to do was to take one example and work through it together. Now, now you know what the Riz test is and the criteria. I wanted to quickly go through, do you think it passes or fails the Riz test? And there should be a poll that just appeared on your screen. So if you give it a quick guess, do you think it passes or fails? Give it a few seconds. Okay. Right, great. So most of you think, 85% think that it fails and 16% think it passes. Well, well done, because we at the Riz test also agree. We think it fails the Riz test. And you may think, well, okay, it fails the Riz test, but why specifically does Iron Man fail the Riz test? And remember, this is the beginning of the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, back in 2008. What I've done, I've summarized the movie in one kind of one caption, which is Tony Stark is held captive in an Afghani cave by Muslim Raza and the 10 Rings group. Is ordered to create weapons helped by the Afghani scientist from Gulmira called Yin Zen. So what I wanted to do is, because I'm a big geek, and I know that a number of you are also fellow geeks, what I wanted to do is compare the movie in 2008 against the graphic novel in 1968. And to do 2 things, to first see how well it translated from the Muslim perspective, but also how true is the movie to the source text, because that's what is important to us geeks as well. So if we take a look at that statement that we looked at earlier, Tony Stark, Afghani cave, Afghani scientist, Yin Zen, I look back at the graphic novel and it looked a little bit like this. In the graphic novel in 1968, it was actually a Vietnamese cave and Vietnamese Wong Chu and the generic Oriental scientist from Gulmira, Ho Yin Zen. So Ho Yin Zen was Arabified to Yin Zen along the way. For the historians amongst you will recognize that 1968 was the height of the Vietnam War and the fight against the threat of communism. And that's not to say that it's good to have to vilify the Vietnamese people, but in that 40-year period between 1968 and 2008, the bad people du jour changed, and that was reflected in the art form. So something happened in a production room somewhere, but I can't quite put my finger on it. And also, Gulmira doesn't exist, which is a common trope used by graphic novels. So the Riz test itself, the methodology that we've used, that we've taken 2 or 3 years to put together, is really around 3 data sources. The first one being Riz test reviews. Now, we put out a form that people have filled in where they can watch a movie, something on Netflix and something on TV, and it's easy. It's yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. They submit it and it appears in a nice spreadsheet for me to analyze. The second one being, now many of you would have already heard of Dr. Jack Shaheen. He wrote a book called Real Bad Arabs, and he spent his lifetime analyzing thousands of movies that represent Arabs well and not so well. And his research, his lifetime's work is meticulously recorded and catalogued. I strongly recommend you take a look. That was the second pillar. And the third one is curated reviews that me and Sadia know pass and fail the Riz test, but we've added them in so it rounds out the data a little bit more, a little bit better. Over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, what we've done is analysed 1,100 films, TV shows that we've reviewed and analysed over a period of 120 years. So that's from 1900 to the year 2020. And they're globally sourced movies from Hollywood and Bollywood and in a number of different languages from Europe, from the Middle East, from Iranian cinema, for instance. Now, I appreciate 1,100 movies and TV shows is a difficult number to get your head around. It's a big number and it's difficult to visualize. So I've done that for you. So this is a representation of 1,100 films and TV shows, and that's 1,100 squares. I know because I copy and pasted each one. So when we looked at that landscape that looks like an audience seating plan, straight away, 10% do not qualify for the Riz test. They don't have that qualifying character that we use to qualify for the Riz test. A further 5% don't qualify because it's pre-Islam, it predates the Islamic religion. Those are movies such as Ben-Hur, Antony and Cleopatra, the many remakes of Antony and Cleopatra, and anything that refers to ancient Egypt. A further 5% don't qualify. Now, this is interesting because they don't qualify for the Riz test, but there's no character, but Islam is spoken about negatively, which still has an impact, but it's not strictly qualified for the Riz test. 80% does qualify for the Riz test, and we'll kind of break that down shortly. And also, one movie does qualify for the Riz test. And so it didn't qualify for the Riz test, but it does talk about Muslims positively, which is a rare gem. And if you're interested, that's actually Raising Arizona from 1987. So which is proof that Nicolas Cage has truly done everything in his career. Moving on, so what we've done is, so to summarize, that's 1,100 movies globally sourced from the last 120 years, individually reviewed and filtered. And the question is, of those movies that do qualify for the Riz test, how many pass and how many fail? That looks like this. Of the movies that we reviewed, 87% fail and only 13% pass. Now think about that statistic for a second, because if you think about how most of the movies that we watch on TV, most of them represent Muslims poorly. And it also proves that not all representation is good representation. And for scale, the next slide is, according to IMDb, excuse me, 6.6 million films and TV shows were released between 1900 and 2020. And the movies that were reviewed in the Riz test account for only 0.00013% of all of that. So it's rare to see yourself on screen if you're a Muslim. And when you do, it's most likely going to be negative. I wanted to do a thematic analysis of the last 100 years, of the last century. And remember back, we were talking about terror, culture, and gender. Now, the gender side of things, Muslim men are represented as misogynists and women as oppressed females overwhelmingly over the last 100 years. Now, you'll see that there's a slight dip in the statistics around about 1980, but it seems to have bounced back up again. And regardless, it never falls below 25%. In terms of culture, Muslims are presented as angry and superstitious people. Overwhelmingly, there's a constant presence. It never really falls below 60% for anger and around about 70% for superstition, which is again shocking. And the next slide, before I go to it, I had to actually double check the figures. I had to double check that I got it right, but when I was actually quite shocked when I saw it. But when it comes to Western threat and terrorism, there's a continuous upward trend when it comes to that. In the 1900s, we weren't seen as a threat at all, but that's just been going up and up and up. It feels as though we're in the dark ages when it comes to Muslim representation. You'll see a slight spike around the 1940s mark. That's where Muslims were seen as collaborators with the Nazis. And in 1990 to 2000, you see a steep increase, and that's because it comes as no surprise. That's where the war in Iraq and the war on terror 9/11 happened. Very, very stark and frightening statistics. But it's not all bad news, and it's difficult. It's easy to focus on the 87%, but here are some great examples from the 13%. So Rocks, if you haven't seen Rocks, I urge that you do. It's on Netflix. Wonderful representation, a wonderful coming of age movie that is really worth watching. Corsorelli actually is up for a BAFTA. Superstore, again on Netflix. Saeed is a character in the show. He goes and prays at regular breaks, which is something that I can relate to. The Romanovs, Hajar, brilliant character. She's not the model immigrant character. She's a nuanced, flawed person, which is great. And finally, one of my favorites, Mr. Robot, Trenton, a badass hacker, great character. When I launched the Riz Test, one movie this is my favorite movie, by the way. I love this movie. It's Office Space from 1999. And one character that really stuck with me since I watched it when I was back at uni. And this character, Samir, I thought, why is this character stuck with me this whole time? First of all, it passes the Riz Test. Second of all, why does this character resonate with me? He's a brown dude with a beard. He works in IT. He's irritable. He's irritating. He hates his commute and he hates his colleagues, really. And I thought, why does this character resonate with me? And it's because it is me. That is me. That's me. And I thought, I'm a brown dude with a beard. I'm irritating. Believe me, I'm irritable. I hate my commute. I actually love my colleagues, but that's a separate story. But that's the importance of seeing yourself on screen, because it sticks with you and it really kind of resonates. It stays with you. Now, this is the research we've done so far has got us to today, and what you've seen today is a small tip of the iceberg as to what we have with the data. We've got a really rich, beautiful, delicious data set that we're kind of want to deep dive into. It's taken us about 2 years. It's the first cut, 1,100 movies, 865 qualify for the Riz Test, over 120 years. 87% fail and 13% pass. Please, if there's one statistic that you take away, it's that one: 87 and 13, 87 and 13, 87 and 13. Take that away, keep that in your heads. And what we do is we run workshops around the country at universities and at organizations and at festivals and events. Next up, what we want to do is we want to, before the end of the year, we want to release our first annual flagship report of 120 years of Muslims on screen, which go into much more depth than we have done today. And we want to achieve 2,000 reviews. That's broadly from the submitted Riz Test submissions. That's where we want to be. And we're working on teaching materials and lesson plans. We're working with educators, schools and colleges to produce something that they can teach in school. And for further research, really, this is endless. We want to do an analysis of genres, breakdown of box office, geographic analysis. Is Hollywood better than Bollywood, or Bollywood better than Hollywood? I mean, spoiler alert, Bollywood is awful. We want to break down of production houses and distributors and more thematic analyses. And that's where we really want to be. So that's really it. So thank you for sitting through it. And if you want to follow me and follow our work, there are my details on screen. Please do get in touch, shaf@riztest.com, and on Twitter. I'm now going to hand it over to my dear friend Sajid at UK Muslim Film, who's going to talk about how we drive that change forward. Thank you.
Okay, right. Thank you for that, Chef. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. My name is Sajid Varda. I'm the founder, CEO of UK Muslim Film. I self-describe for access as an Asian male, mixed heritage with East African and Indian roots, with a beard, short hair, and green eyes. I'm wearing a dark grey jacket with white shirt, sitting in a brightly lit room with a tall green plant behind me. Firstly, a huge thank you to Ben Roberts and Jen Smith and to all at the BFI for their pioneering initiatives and support. I'd love to thank the wonderful Liz McIntyre, my industry humanist, who guided me early on and introduced me to many wonderful people, including Noreen Kemp and Jen. My advisors and supporters, Asri Ali Khan from Liquid TV and my fellow co-chair on the Screen Advisory, Simon Meir. And of course, to everyone joining us here today. This really is a big moment for us, not just for me, but crucially for the community that I represent and all audiences. I'm excited to talk to you today about UK Muslim Film, which is a new hub and festival to encourage pride in and excite curiosity about Muslim culture and faith through storytelling. Now, let me begin by first talking about my personal journey, which influenced the creation of UK Muslim Film. Thanks, Rico. Okay. So I grew up as a child in the early 80s. As a kid, I was cheeky and curious and always enjoyed impersonating people. And my parents found it quite amusing, as it wasn't a normal thing for a 7-year-old Asian Muslim boy to be doing, spending his time impersonating Prince Charles. We were busy training to be doctors, lawyers, and accountants. But I loved the reactions I got and that laughter and seeing that it made people happy. My parents decided to sign me up to an acting agency. Now, my sister and I were the only children of colour in our school, and so for a while, I didn't see myself as different than any other child until my skin colour was very kindly brought to my attention. Now, acting and singing weren't just an outlet for my love of performing, but it also helped me find my confidence, my voice, and overcome a stammer that had become the focus of bullying for so much of my childhood. Next slide. At around the age of 8, I surprised my parents again by wanting to join a boys' choir. I was the only child of colour out of 70 boys, performing around the world with renowned conductors and orchestras, which was truly transformative. My foray into acting came when I won a part in a local theatre production of Peter Pan. Sadly, I was only ever considered for the role of an Indian. This was an unusual journey for an Asian Muslim boy, and I was very much the exception to the rule. My parents pushed me to excel in the arts, something which is now embraced by many more Muslim families. Next slide. Some great storylines. Now, stepping into the world of TV and film in the 90s was really scary, especially when so few Asian actors were working in the industry. There were no shows at the time that reflected people like me. The only one I remember is Mind Your Language. Now, as an actor, my first part on TV was a supporting lead in the comedy series Teenage Heartbreak. I played a regular Asian schoolchild that wasn't stereotyped, and we had a diverse cast. Thumbs up. Now, interestingly enough, my role in Biker Grove covered race in a really big way. It was a groundbreaking storyline for the time, aimed at addressing racism with younger audiences. Again, my character was not a stereotype, and the director, Jim Shields, spent time consulting with me on how my character should be played. I had a similar experience in the legal drama Wing and a Prayer, where my character, who had a stutter, was on trial giving evidence against a racist police officer. I'm grateful for these experiences, and the process of being involved in that way informed the way I work today. Now, looking back, it's strange that it felt a little bit easier to be cast in roles that didn't mean you were defined by your race or your faith. That's not to say that we didn't have problems with representation and diversity. Next slide. The narrative changes. Now, everything changed post 9/11. This tragedy caused a dramatic shift in storylines for Muslim characters, and all of a sudden, my faith was the thing that was under the spotlight. Asians and Muslims on screen were now lumped together and painted with the same terrorist brush. Next slide. Fellow Muslim actors would tell me that they wanted to audition for normal roles, but these were few. Muslim writers would submit great stories only to be told that they needed to include more tropes before it could be greenlit. Now, although Muslims were prevalent on screen, that representation did not permeate where it counted, in the writer's room, or at an executive level, which is another reason for why UK Muslim film came into being. We were not being given the opportunity to tell our stories, and there were very few to advocate for that. Now, on screen, my faith was used as a weapon to create misrepresentation. The Muslim call to prayer, the adhan, a sound that creates a feeling of peace, was used to signal acts of terrorism perpetuated by terrorist caricatures. The words Allahu Akbar, used in moments of devotion and prayer, were now used in tabloid headlines alongside images of terrorism. These associations sealed firmly in the minds of the less informed that Islam and Muslims equated to terror and murder. Next slide. How are Muslims portrayed on screen? Now, there is so much richness and cultural diversity within Islam, but we seldom see that reflected in the stories that we see on screen. So how are we portrayed? And I'm sure that many of you have some of your own ideas, but these are the most common portrayals. Muslims as terrorists, Muslim men are misogynists, Muslim women are oppressed, and Islam is a threat to Western society. Now, the great work of Shaf Chowdhury and Dr. Sadi Habib at the Riz Test has highlighted the challenge we face with hard data. Hearing that over 87% of films over the past 120 years have failed the Riz Test is stark, but it has enabled us to have that difficult but much needed conversation. Next slide. Now, do negative portrayals have an impact? Yes, absolutely. We find that what is being portrayed on screen spills out into the everyday experiences of Muslims and has emboldened the ignorant and led to physical acts of violence against Muslims, especially those in more vulnerable positions. I'm sure those Muslims in attendance here today can share personal stories or experiences from close family and friends. I have a few stories of my own. Now, here are some statistics from the Centre for Media Monitoring, which highlight the direct impact of negative portrayals and imagery. Some of these high-level stats, as you can see, after Boris's letterbox comment, it rose to a 375% increase in hate crime and hate speech against Muslims. We found that over 20 children excluded every day from school for racial abuse of their peers, and 32% believe there are no-go areas in Britain where non-Muslims cannot enter. Now, I'm still trying to figure out where these no-go areas are, possibly Tooting, but answers on a postcard, please. So the next slide, we find that in summary, misrepresentation embeds itself in the psyche of the people, which then leads to further ignorance and otherization. Next slide. So why do we need better representation? In every playground in the country, young children of different religions, ethnicities, and cultural backgrounds play happily and harmoniously together with more awareness of what they have in common than what divides them. But over time, with exposure to the relentless narrative of fear and hatred that is delivered to them through film and television, through social media, and the mainstream news, they start to look at one another as different, and they are being taught to be afraid of each other. This is where UK Muslim film plays a part. This is a very important observation of Carlos Cortez, a historian, who summarized it really in three parts. Firstly, the entertainment media teaches the public about minorities. This mass media has this powerful educational impact for those people who don't usually come into contact with those minority groups that are being spoken about. And finally, the media influences not how we are viewed, but how we view ourselves, which really can damage the psyche of the youth, which has been proven in statistics. Now, as a 7-year-old child growing up in the UK, I never felt that sense of belonging, and racism really was the norm. The fear of the unknown was caused by how we were being represented on screen. Now, representation is very much dependent upon who is in control of the narrative. That is why it's important to involve more Muslim creators at all levels. Next slide, 17. Better representation is good for business. Now, this is very interesting. Next slide. It absolutely is important, and it's absolutely true. And this is an exciting area of research for me. Now, we have teamed up with Professor Matthias Frey at the University of Kent School of Arts to explore the many benefits of greater representation and diversity together with the BFI and the Riz Test. Now, there is a perception that ethnic minority casting may hinder funding and profits. That's actually not true. I mean, you've just seen an example of Kosa Ali, who's been nominated for a BAFTA in the Best Supporting Female Actor role for the film Rocks. She's a first-time entrant into the world of film and television. There are many more examples. We all know about the box office success of Black Panther. Journalist Kimberly Lawson wrote that Black Panther has been hailed as a model success story for depicting diversity on screen. Now, according to past research, the representation of minority groups in mass media has a powerful educational impact on audiences. A more recent example is Bridgerton, which has been watched by over 82 million households since Christmas, proving that you can have diversity in period drama. British comedian Jeannie Asher's US hit show Bob Hart's Abishola, based on the life of a Nigerian nurse, co-created by Chuck Lorre, is CBS's highest rated sitcom. It's amassed over 5 million views every single week. Better representation and authenticity can be a formula to commercial success. Now, incidentally, Gina did have to relocate to the US for this opportunity. Now, I'm a great believer in next slide, the Tiger Hunter. Now, I'm a great believer in nurturing and developing talent, something that UK Muslim film is passionate about. My path to producing began with a fortuitous meeting with a talented hijab-wearing filmmaker. I met Lena at a community event in LA where she was speaking about and raising money for a feature film. I could really sense her passion and her uniqueness of vision, and I fell in love with the script and signed up to help produce a film with an amazing team. We created a multi-award winning feature film, The Tiger Hunter. Lena was quickly signed up and her career has since flourished. Lena's just completed directing her feature film Flora and Ulysses for Disney. I'm excited that Lena has joined as our ambassador and I believe has joined us today on this call. The Chop. Now, the work we hope to do with UK Muslim Film is not just for Muslim creatives, it's work that intends to have a global impact. Now, one of the inspirations behind UK Muslim Film was my involvement in a wonderful film written and directed by Lewis Rose and cast by the amazing Sharon Sorrentino. Now, The Chop is a short film about a talented Jewish butcher who loses his job over a misunderstanding, searches for a new one, and when he's about to lose hope, decides to chance a job at halal butchers by pretending to be a Muslim. The film premiered at the Jewish Film Festival. Now, at the premiere, my family and I stood out from the crowd, and there was an atmosphere of uncertainty. But once the film and the Q&A had finished, the mood shifted. So many from the audience wanted to congratulate and show us love. It just broke down barriers that evening. That film that brought together Jewish and Muslim characters handled both communities in a nuanced and sensitive way. The Chop went on to win over 53 international awards. That is not just the power of storytelling, but that is the power of storytelling that goes beyond stereotypes, but reflects communities honestly and authentically. Next slide. UK Muslim Film. I'm really excited to be talking about the work of the charity today. Now, UK Muslim Film was set up as a response to the growing need to celebrate the Muslim community on screen and audio, challenge misconceptions through new storytelling in film, television, radio, and podcast, broaden audiences, and champion underrepresented talent and voices. Now, we believe that media in all its form has a capacity to change audience perspectives and open our minds to new and exciting possibilities. We are also providing an all-important advisory to the industry on projects, whether they may be in development or production, on all topical subject matters. This will help make stories more truthful and authentic, building a relationship of trust with audiences. Next slide. Now, we aim to be a hub to facilitate connections between decision makers, creators, and crew members, and ensure not only fair hiring practices, but pave the way for underrepresented groups with a focus on Muslim industry players to have a place at the table too, and become the decision makers, board and committee members. Now, we're going to have 4 programs. Firstly, film screenings, which will be in conjunction with filmmakers and distributors, hosting Q&A with filmmakers and audiences. Talks from industry leaders, broadcasters and streaming platforms, masterclasses in all aspects of filmmaking, and the creation of a writer's room led by experienced writers with the aim of fostering the development of emerging screenwriters and connecting them with the industry. a marketplace for pitching sessions, funding discussions, submitting ideas for consideration, truly a matchmaking service for ideas and funders. A funding film fund to fund short form film scripts for emerging filmmakers, providing mentoring for them for script to screen. But my ideal is to have a fund to be able to really help that rising star with their first full-length feature project. Now, this is a year-end hub. It builds up to a celebration with the Muslim International Film Festival, which is a filmmaking platform for Muslim and those of other backgrounds to showcase their work to a broad audience. Next slide. Now, we look forward to working closely with the BFI and all of our partners to be a catalyst for change in the industry. We would love for those of you in attendance today to join our journey as allies, supporters, funders, sponsors, or ambassadors. Reach out and let's have a discussion on how we can collaborate. Starting modestly and building, we're here to help you tell and enjoy powerful, authentic stories that change perspectives and make good business sense too. Final slide. My journey is just one out of many. My 6-year-old son, Mikhail, is on the journey I once was. If he decides this industry is part of that journey, then I hope it's one where his presence isn't pushed into stereotypes and negative depictions. I hope it's one where he can dream big and believe he can be part of any story, of being any character, irrespective of his race and faith, maybe even Iron Man. Let's change the script. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajid. Thank you so much, Shaf. This is now the opportunity for you to put any questions that you might have to us, that you can enter them in the chat box at the bottom. So I'm Simon Meir, I'm the co-chair of the advisory group. Just to visually describe myself, I have long brown hair, I'm wearing blue glasses, and I have a black dress on, and I'm in a room with a mirror on the side. So while you add your questions, we've got a few that we thought might come up, which I'm just going to put to Sajid and Shaf to see what they think. So I suppose one of the big questions that most people will ask is, are we saying that all Muslim portrayals have to be positive? Sajid, what do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. No. Clearly not. Look, we're a creative industry. And what I would say is that make those projects that you're passionate about, but also at the same time, bear in mind that we have many productions out there already which really focus on the negative. But what we don't have and what we haven't explored are all those amazing nuanced stories in between. So what I would say is always ask that question, the why, but bear in mind that if you want to capture an audience like the Muslim community, not just here, but that global audience of over 1.9 billion, then maybe tell those stories which they can relate to.
It's a complicated one, isn't it? So my story, The Khan, has been optioned by BBC Studios, and it's really interesting to me to see Shaf's Riz Test, because while you were doing it, Shaf, I was thinking, does The Khan pass it? And it's a crime novel that's about a Muslim woman, and it's about a crime family. So it's not a positive representation of Muslims, you know, killing people is not really positive. But I was really pleased to see that it did pass that test. And I suppose part of it is just not falling into tropes, isn't it, and stereotypes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think, as Sajid said, that what we're not looking for is as every Muslim to be a hero on TV, because you know, not every Muslim is a hero, right? And referring to Samir from Office Space, he's not a particularly pleasant character in the movie. If you've seen it, he's not a particularly likable person, but I liked him because he was fun and he was nuanced. And I mean, I think it goes back to my obsession with Nicolas Cage, really, because if you think about what the roles that Nicolas Cage has played, he's played goodies and baddies and literally everything in between, and things that we don't quite understand as well. And I think, why can't those characters be Muslim as well? Why can't we have a really wonderfully evil, nuanced, evil genius, right? Why can't we have those characters as well? That's
Yeah,
what it's
absolutely. Exactly. I think some of it's about being honest, isn't it? Being honest on the page and then that translating to the screen about what we're like. And right now it feels as if we're not seeing that honesty. We're sort of seeing tropes and stereotypes. The other question I have for you, Shaf, is, did you see any difference in Muslim representation in genres? Was that different?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because when it comes to there's this fiction and there's reality and all that kind of stuff. But what I found the most heinous example is in science fiction, because in science fiction, again, it's a genre that I love very much, but that still falls foul to some of the tropes, because in science fiction you can imagine anything. The only limitation is your imagination, right? If we can imagine, people who can fly and special powers and stuff, even in that context, Muslims are still, they're still kind of compiled down to these tropes. An example that I'd give is Black Panther. Great movie. I really enjoyed it. But it fails the Riz test. For all of its positive representation, it fails the Riz test, because there's that one bit in there that I really picked out, where they're in Nigeria. There's like a Boko Haram group, and the line in the movie is, there's a gun held to someone's head and said, "Wallahi, I will kill her." I thought, oh gosh, that's like, they throwing in some Arabic as well. It's like, I thought, well, even in science fiction where anything is possible, what doesn't seem to be possible is a nuanced Muslim character.
Yeah, totally. I feel as if intersectionality is the key here, isn't it? And I think in terms of commercial success, that's what people want to see. We've seen so much representation of people in monochrome, and we don't see that with other groups. Screenwriters are so brilliant and filmmakers are so brilliant at adding that nuance. It's interesting to me why we're not getting that filtering through with people who come from a Muslim background. Sajid, like you said, the azan, why is it always used in that one way when it's such an emotive sound to so many of us? It could be used in so many clever ways. I suppose it's about raising our game, isn't it, as filmmakers?
It is, and I think we see that a lot now when you have a movie and you have the beautiful adhan, this call to prayer, and then it's closely followed by people huddling around, strapping bombs to themselves, and then setting themselves off outside some government building. It's about it's about what looks good, what's beautiful in terms of cinematically. But I think sometimes what we don't realize is making those associations has a real negative impact. So as I mentioned earlier, it sits in the psyche of people when they hear the call to prayer, closely followed by some sort of act of terrorism, that there's a link. And that's just not the case. When I hear the call to prayer in my house, there isn't usually anyone scurrying around my house strapping bombs to themselves. It just doesn't happen. So we have to be very, very careful. I think it's about the sensitivity as well. I think what's happened is we haven't really looked at productions or looked at the script and thought, how is this going to come across? How is it going to influence those who are going to be watching this? And what you'll find is when we see it in a movie, and other Muslims will tell you this, everyone sits back and they're like, oh, not this. And they know what's coming. And that's why Muslim audiences are really looking for something different and, as I said, something nuanced. There are so many stories that are told. I mean, imagine in the UK, if we were just to focus on the World War I as a story, World War II, Jimmy Savile, and that was kind of it, and nothing really in between, it wouldn't make for a great watching. But there are so many lovely stories that can be told. But it's about empowering those writers and getting them in the writers' room as well, giving them that voice, but not telling them it's a lovely script, but we want you to change this because we think that's going to be more palatable to the audiences that we are trying to cater to. Audiences want something different. If you keep feeding people the same diet of bangers and mash, they'll get used to it, but everyone wants something different. They want maybe, teppanyaki, or they might want Indian food, or they want something different.
Yeah,
so give them that.
Definitely a call for it, isn't it? We've got some questions coming in. So there is a question about the reluctant fundamentalist Shaft. did you look at The Reluctant Fundamentalist? Did it pass the Riz test? And the second bit to this question, can a film have stereotypical themes / characters as well as non-stereotypical ones? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So The Reluctant Fundamentalist, by virtue of it being about terror and that theme, it doesn't pass the Riz test. One thing to consider is that the Riz test is not particularly nuanced. It's only 5 criteria. It's not a nuanced test. And that's very much because it's a reaction to the industry, because the way that Muslims are presented on screen is not nuanced. So really the Riz test is a response to that. It's not nuanced. It needs to be nuanced, and there's definitely call for that and discussion to be had. But I think the industry kind of needs, with respect, maybe it needs a little bit of a bonk on the head, really. It needs that bluntness. It doesn't need nuance. We're not there yet. But the question in terms of, can a movie have, or a production have, positive and negatives? And of course it can. I think probably, in my opinion, the best example of that is Chris Morris's Four Lions. I mean, that's a satire. So personally, I feel that it passes the Riz test because it's satirical. But many would argue differently. People would fail the Riz test. But I think that's the conversation, right? That's the conversation. Four Lions does it so incredibly well because Chris Morris spent the best part of 6 or 7 years researching it before he paid a lot of respect to the subject matter, and that's why Muslims love it. You know, Muslims really do love Four Lions. It's on everyone's shelf. I think one thing to be careful about is not to fall into the good Muslim, bad Muslim trope. Definitely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think we've seen that in The Siege. Remember watching The Siege back when we were younger?
Was that Steven Seagal?
Oh gosh, it was
Under Siege, yeah.
Yeah. It was Under Siege, and there's The Siege, the Denzel Washington.
Yeah.
And in the Siege, it has the good Muslim who's a CIA operative who is presented as less Muslim. He drinks and he's adjacent to the of power, and the bad Muslim are the ones who are in these internment camps, who are the falafel store owner, the taxi drivers. So there's a trope not to be careful about. They're the good Muslim, bad Muslim trope.
I think for me as a storyteller, I think this is a really interesting question, because stereotypes come from somewhere. They don't come from zero. You know, they're not sort of pulled out of thin air. So some of those things do exist. So when we talk about misogyny, it does exist, but then that exists across the world. But then if you pair that with a woman who's completely oppressed and has no agency of her own, then that's not a truth of everyone's experience. It's not actually a universal experience or a universal truth. It's something that's going on somewhere. But you've got to have that conflict for a story to be good, haven't we? And I have this, what Shaf has described to me as the rep sweats, where when I tell a story, and so my story, The Khan, has these misogynistic men in it, but the thing that makes it, I think, pass Shaf's test, is the Riz test, is that the female character and the way she deals with it is completely different to how stereotypically stories deal with it. So I think it's that balance of getting the non-stereotype. If you need to have that character in there with those stereotypical themes, I mean, first of all, we need to ask ourselves, do we need it? Is it clever? Because part of the creative process for us is becoming cleverer with each thing that we do, right? We raise our game. So the cleverest option, and then seeing, do we need it? And if you do need it, what do we pair it with to bring balance to the story?
The other point to note, Simon, as well, is in terms of how is authentic the portrayal. So if you look at how the Muslim is depicted and look around maybe the ritualistic aspects of worship, maybe the family life, etc., it's also about getting that right too. So I mean, one case in point is I love the film Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Morgan Freeman, Kevin Costner, amazing. But then when you see Morgan Freeman pray, it's not any prayer I've ever seen a Muslim do. So it's about getting those things right, because don't forget, as viewers, as an audience, as a global audience, when we look at it, when we see that those things are done correctly, then for us it's almost as if we don't matter, and not enough time was taken to really explore, right, how do we do this properly and make sure that we really build this trust with the audience that, you know what, we want to represent you well. So I think that's the other thing to be really mindful of. And I'm seeing a lot more people getting in touch, or some people here as well today. I won't name names, but they're really on it. They really want to know exactly how they can do this well and properly, because they're pioneering. They want to really capture a new audience, but they also want to really dispel a lot of these misconceptions too.
We're running out of time, so I'm just going to quickly ask a couple more questions, just if we could keep it succinct. So there's a question saying, what are the key takeaway and actions that you would like from viewers on the call? What would you like people to take away from this? Shaf?
I think for me, it's understanding that not all representation is good representation, right? It's about doing it well, and we saw that. You know, out of all these 6.6 million crazy number of movies that have been created since 1900, whenever we do see Muslims on screen, most likely they're going to be a trope. It's very there's a tiny percentage that actually do it well, and I think I want that to be taken away. And to you mentioned it earlier, Simon, I think it's really important to understand the intersectionality of it, and we don't really cover that, strictly speaking, in the Riz Test. There's only 5 criteria, but it's very intersectional. I think that's what we need to walk away with, that when you do represent Muslims, do it well, tell the stories you want to tell, make that art, but be conscious of how Muslims are being represented. That's it from me.
Thank you. Sajid?
I would say that we are a creative industry, so we need to be more creative. I think that today has shown that, look, there's definitely a challenge that we all acknowledge and understand, but it's about how do we now make that change. And so with what the BFI are doing, which is really driving this initiative, with the work of UK Muslim Film, now we have vehicles to be able to change the narrative or change the script, so to speak. So what I'd say is engage. Talk to us, let us know what it is that you need to do, that you need from us, in order to make sure that we're doing things right, we're doing it properly, that we're driving this change forward at a quick pace as well. And be a part of our journey, you know, whether it's taking part in our masterclasses, whether it's delivering panel talks, you know, get to know our writers from our writers' room, maybe audition them, see what they've got. Let's get pitch discussions going, because there is such a huge number of very talented individuals that won't get to see the light of day. But if you're to give them that chance, you know, they will be making your next, you know, highest grossing film or TV series, but they need that chance, and they need someone to reach out to say, you know what, we want to know your stories. And just be encompassing of them as well. But the main thing is, you're all here today, so there's a keen interest. Let's work together and just change that script.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I think we've run out of time, but it's been so brilliant. Talking about that last blockbuster film idea, do we need a Black Panther moment, one that passes the Riz test?
Shaf?
Yeah, I mean, it would be wonderful to see. It would be wonderful to inspire the next generation, you know, young people and old cynics like myself, right? It would be wonderful to see that.
Yeah, I think I'm jaded enough, and I really need to see that now. I need to feel it. I need to see some amazing kick-ass woman of Muslim heritage who's smashing stereotypes on screen, because I've seen so much of the other that I really need some hope. So I'd like to say that change is incremental and, you know, excruciatingly incremental, but actually I think we're so clever as an industry and so smart, and we have such brilliant allies, that it's time that we did this. So,
there is a demand, and they are commercially can be very successful as well. So there is definitely drivers to really making that particular project happen.
Sajid, Shaf, thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Rico now and say thank you to everyone at the BFI for hosting this and for putting us on screen. You all know where we are. If you'd like to contact us, you can always drop us messages. I'm sure Jen will have the information, but thank you so much. And thank you so much to Jen Smith and to Rico for all your support. It's been wonderful. Thank you.